So tonight, I would like to welcome Ginger Shelby, who's going to be speaking to us in a few moments about funeral preparations. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about directives you may leave at the church regarding a funeral service. And then we're going to have some time for questions and conversation. But I'd like to introduce Ginger Shelby. Ginger has worked in the funeral, cremation, and cemetery business for 35 years. She spent the first 26 years of her career in the upstate of South Carolina. She was president of Dillard Memorial Inc., her family business, which owned and operated 2 funeral homes and a crematory business in Pickens and Oconee counties. She relocated to Daniel Island in 2013 and is the director of advanced planning with J. Henry Sturr Funeral Chapels and Crematory. Ginger is a 1986 graduate of the College of Charleston. She is a licensed funeral director and embalmer in both South and North Carolina, and a licensed pre-need agent in the state of South Carolina. Ginger, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's so nice to have you with us.
Well, I am thrilled to be here with everyone. Everybody excited to talk about funeral and cremation planning? So I want to share my screen. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. And it just really keeps me on track to make a few points. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that'll work just fine. All right. So I really just kind of want to go briefly, and do you want me to take questions at the end? Is that how we want to do this?
That would be great.
Okay, great. So just really 3 points. I want to do a few editorial comments of why I think you should pre-plan. Then I'll get into the meat of the subject, the 3-step pre-planning process, how that works, how we approach it here at Sturr, and how most funeral homes approach it. Of course, Sturr would love to serve everybody in the greater Charleston area, but the information I'm going to share is universal throughout the state. And then we'll do question and answers. Just a quick question for you to think about. Who on this call has ever thought they should get a plan in place? I think most people have had, yeah, some people have them. Most people have had those thoughts. And many times they'll do their wills, living wills, all this preparation, but they won't take that final step and plan for their funeral or their cremation. I think sometimes the topic just seems a little too close to the topic. And, everybody thinks they've got tomorrow. They think they've got next week. They think they've got next year and years to come, and we're really never promised tomorrow. So I think people can tend to procrastinate that. So thank you for being here and learning a little bit tonight. And I encourage you again, whether you use Sturr or whatever provider you use in the community, to reach out and to put a plan in place for yourself. It's a blessing for who's left behind when they walk through our doors and we pull out a file and everything is in order. And I just encourage you to do that. Really, we work through, and I'm going to give you the legalities as I work through this process. When we sit down with someone, we work through a simple 3-step process. We come to you or you come to us. Most people really like to come in because we have all of our merchandise here. We have the computers, the printers, everything we may need. And the first thing we like to do is gather all your biographical information. The information we're going to need for the state of South Carolina, things such as where you were born, social security number, your parents' names. The state of South Carolina wants to know your level of education, your usual occupation, all the details that we need for the state of South Carolina, which is a very easy thing to do when you're clear-minded. If you have to check a social security number, if your mother died young and somebody can't remember her middle name, you have time to go home, verify information, and get that back to us. Very, very simple step at that point in time. The second thing we do is we'll make notes about the type of services you want. Do you want a cremation, a basic cremation? Do you want a cremation with a memorial service? Do you want a traditional type funeral with burial? We make as many notes as we can about that, and I encourage you to provide us as much information as you can. More is always better. We can review it if it's 20 or 30 years from now. We certainly can make adjustments to that, but we have people who get into music, a lot of different details that they want there at the service. We'll make really good notes about that. And then the third step, we'll itemize that out. Now, we're regulated. You've got some information, a booklet coming to you. We're highly regulated. We're regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, who says every funeral home and cremation provider in America has to provide a general price list. The language on the general price list is similar and standard according to the Federal Trade Commission and how they make us put those together. So we'll take our price list and we'll itemize out everything service by service. So people have the right to pick and choose the services they want. Years ago, we said I grew up in the business. You would walk into a big room of caskets and the funeral director would put their hand on the casket and say, this funeral costs $2,000. And that had everything in it we could offer. Limousines, visitations, chapel or church service. And the Federal Trade Commission said that was unfair, that we had to put a price on everything. So once we finish that process, we'll itemize out everything service by service. So you have a general idea of what it costs today.
Her name Ginger Shelby. Okay.
And at that point in time, you have an unfunded file, instructions and a good path for your family to run on and us to guide them when something happens. You don't necessarily have to pay for it ahead of time. I think some people think to pre-plan, you have to prepay. That is not necessarily the truth. You can certainly pre-plan without prepaying. And I'm going to get into prepayment in a few minutes because there's some misconceptions about that. But I'm sure I have some cremation families on the call, I would imagine. Talk to you a little bit about cremation. Cremation today means a lot of different things to different people. When I first started 30-something years ago, cremation meant inexpensive and very basic. Now that we still do that, inexpensive, very basic cremations, but we also have cremations with a memorial service at the church, with a burial in a churchyard. We even have full service traditional funerals followed by cremation. I would have never dreamed that when we first came up with that concept. And really, it started, I will say, predominantly in the Catholic Church, because some of the old line Catholics wanted that casket and that body present in the church. And so then we do a full preparation. We have a viewing, visitation, a church service, and instead of going to the cemetery immediately, we go to the crematory. So cremation will go through that entire exercise of exactly what you want for your family as it relates to cremation. Another important aspect of cremation in planning ahead is you can come in and sign your own cremation authorization. I encourage everyone to do that. That eliminates your funeral home or cremation provider having to get your next of kin to sign. So for example, husband and wife don't plan. He dies, she's the legal next of kin. She comes in and takes care of everything. She can sign the legal document to have him cremated. Then she dies. Then we have to just assume they have kids. We have to get all the kids to sign and agree.
Oh,
now, state law says we have to get the majority. That's state law. Catherine Sturr says we're getting all of them because it's just too risky for us if we got 4 kids to get 3 to sign and not get that 4th. Because if they show up one day and say, I didn't want mom or dad cremated, then we've got an uh-oh moment. So we make every effort to get the majority plus all of them. If you don't have children, that becomes more complicated because it's your parent or a brothers and sisters or nieces and nephews. That really eliminates any disagreement. And people are emotional. As we know, when someone dies, emotions are high and disagreements happen, even though we think they're not. So that's a great thing for you to do for your families. Go ahead and get that authorization signed and it is legally binding. That means that if we have knowledge of that document, you will be cremated. The only person who can change those instructions is you while you're living. So cremation families, I encourage you at a minimum to come in, get a file set up, and get that authorization signed. A couple other legalities about cremation that I like to mention: the timeline. People think they'll die today and be cremated tomorrow. That just doesn't happen in the real world, because we have to do several things. We have to have that authorization signed. The biographical information has to be placed on a worksheet, reviewed by our death certificate office. They will get the doctor to sign and put cause and manner of death and filed at the state before we can legally cremate. That's the biggest hoop we have to jump through. And we've got a dedicated staff member. That's all she does, is work with doctors and coroner's office, trying to get that done as efficiently and as fast as possible so that cremation can take place, because many times families are waiting to set the service because they want the urn present there at the service for the burial. So just some things we go through when we meet with people to make sure that they fully understand how that process works. Now, let's talk about prepayment. You know, the question is, one day somebody's going to have to pay for it. People are choosing to pay for it ahead of time. And I'll go back to the early 70s when my grandfather and my father ran the funeral home. People would walk through the doors and say, "We'd like to pay for our funeral ahead of time." Well, we'd never heard of such a thing in the early 70s. And so there were no regulations in place. A funeral home could spend the money. They could put the money in a savings account. And the
ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people back then, you know, and so funeral homes started setting up savings accounts. The regulators got involved and were highly regulated in today's world as it relates to prepayment. The first layer of protection for consumers, whether you pay overtime or in full, is we're required to trust the funds.
Oh.
Until about the mid-1990s, we put everything in a bank trust. We no longer do that. We use an insurance company. And the reason is consumers who purchased that funeral had to pay tax on the interest until they died. And no matter how we explained that to someone, when the K-1s went out in March, our phone would ring off the hook. You mean I got to pay tax on my funeral I prepaid? That was an IRS regulation. We currently use Atlantic Coast Life here locally. They hold the funds. We can't touch or use those funds for anything. Only time we can get those funds was when death occurs. So that's your first layer of protection. It is your money set aside to pay your funeral or your cremation when death occurs. The second part of that regulation, all funeral homes in the state of South Carolina are required to be licensed with the state and put up a performance bond. With every contract we draw up, there's a $40 one-time fee that registers those contracts with South Carolina Consumer Affairs. They're our watchdog. So the STRs have to provide financial information to be licensed, the performance bond, and license with the state on an annual basis. So if you're concerned about that, you can get right on South Carolina Consumer Affairs website and see if your funeral home is licensed to provide this service to the public, because we can't use the funds or encumber them in any way until they're needed. A couple of other things, people say, why would I go to STR Funeral Home and pay my funeral? What if I move? And that happens in Charleston, South Carolina, because mom and dad are here. Dad dies, and then mom moves back to Ohio to live with a daughter because she needs to live near someone in the family. By law, you can transfer your funds to any funeral home anywhere. That's not STR policy, that's state law. So if your circumstances change and you move, you can transfer to any funeral home anywhere. People like to know that. Another item is Medicaid. We deal with people who've gone into a nursing home, and usually the social worker at the nursing home is very good to inform families that they can prepay for their funeral or cremation, and it will not count as an asset against them if they go into a nursing home and they're trying to qualify for a Medicaid bed. So we have people that come in and prepay for that purpose. And that's essentially how prepayment works. Now, for all storage charges, our services, our merchandise, when you prepay, you've locked in the price. And what that means is that insurance, the money we put with Atlantic Coast Life will grow. Every year, funeral costs and cremation costs go up. When you pass away, we do a new bill. We send Atlantic Coast a death certificate and they pay us. The guarantee to your family, if there's not enough money at Atlantic Coast Life to cover what we're charging, we're not coming back to them for more money. You've locked it in. Now, there are some items we discuss on an individual basis that end up on our bill that aren't our charges. I'll give you some examples. The post and courier, that South Carolina death certificates. If there's a perpetual care cemetery and you want us to put their opening and closing of the grave charges, if you want us to put ministers' gratuities, musicians, we can put any of those allowances on our contract. And you can prepay them. Here's the difference between those charges and our charges. We can't guarantee the post and courier. You could allow $400 for an obituary in the post and courier, and they could double their prices tomorrow. So if you decide to allow those items on your contract, that portion of the contract works like a savings account. Those funds grow. And when something happens to you, we get the actual charges from the post and courier, all those actual charges, and we pay. You could owe us a few dollars, we could owe you a few dollars. So we reconcile those at the end. Most people want to allow for those items because they don't want their family coming up with money on a bad day when they're emotional and upset. And then we just reconcile those, a week or two down the road and send the family a statement, either with a refund check or a statement, and they owe a few dollars, is how that works. Looking at my notes here, making sure I didn't miss anything. I'm going to go through this summary of benefits, and I want to make sure I don't take too long, and then take some questions. Removes the burden from your loved ones. Nobody wants their loved one, no matter what means you're from, modest amount of money or a lot of money. Nobody wants their loved ones to be spending money on a day when they've lost someone because they have to. That's just not a great place to be. Transferability, we talked about transferability. We do have child and grandchild protection. That is something Atlantic Coast Life offers. If you have a child or a grandchild between the ages of 1 and 21 and unmarried, and something unfortunate happened to them, Atlantic Coast Life pays up to $2,500 as long as you're enrolled and you're living. The good news is grandparents and parents, it rarely ever happens. But when it does, it's an emotional tragedy, to say the least, and that eliminates some of the financial burden from a young family. Stops inflation. People have not been as worried about inflation. I can see as people are coming in, they're starting to worry about inflation that we're all seeing. People want to make sure if they prepay that they've locked in that price. Asset protection, we did talk about Medicaid, so the government can't force you to cash this in. Outside life insurance, if it pushes you above that threshold and you're in a nursing home, you could be forced to cash it in to qualify for that Medicaid bed. Terms to suit. Now, I will say this is an individual discussion, one-on-one. There are payment options. We have payment, or Atlantic Coast Life actually provides these to us, where you can make a payment. There's also some early payoff options where you can get a plan started, and for example, within the first 2 years, you can pay it off early without a whole lot of additional cost. Like I said, those are one-on-one discussions. We talked about the emotional overspending. And early death protection, because we use Atlantic Coast Life, if you're in good health and you're making a payment and you die, Atlantic Coast Life pays us the balance. If you have a health concern, they make you wait the 2 years before the insurability kicks in. And of course, preserves your life insurance that you have for your family and other things and costs that surround death. So that is kind of a lot in a very short period of time, but I know you've got curiosity questions, so I'd love to take any questions.
Greg, I wanted to make sure your question was covered about the order covering state lines. Do you want to say anything about that?
Simple question. Does the cremation order cover state lines? If you do that here, but you're in Kentucky when you die, what happens?
The cremation authorization?
Yes, ma'am.
It is a state of South Carolina document, so the answer is no. You have to be cremated in this state. Kentucky will probably, it wouldn't make sense financially to bring you back from Kentucky unless your family just wanted to see you to Charleston. So if we had you cremated in Kentucky, we would probably have to find out what their authorization is and get it signed at the time.
Ginger, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
I had a situation where I had a relative die unexpectedly at a relatively young age, not in Charleston, but the family wanted them cremated, and we began shopping actually for crematories and found a vast difference in prices. Can you explain that?
I can explain it to you, absolutely. Every business has different business models, as does the funeral and cremation business. For example, STIR is what I will term a full service facility. We will not be your cheapest because we have our buildings, we have a large staff, and we have staff members that specialize in everything we do, from going out to doing the removals, the death certificate lady, which doesn't seem important until you need it, our climate control facilities. We have dedicated staff that works and runs our crematories. We have a dedicated lady who follows up with every single family for aftercare. She will file for insurance, retirement accounts. She'll contact Social Security. So we offer a lot of service and facilities and staff. You do have the I'll call them somewhat of a direct disposer business. They will pick you up. They will cremate you. Sometimes, they don't have as big facilities for services. They'll get you to a church. And that's not who we are. So you will find a wide variety of pricing as it relates to cremation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you got to do what you're comfortable with.
Well, it depends on what you want.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. It depends on what you want and where you feel comfortable you're going to be taken care of and your family's going to be taken care of. I can't say anything bad about the low-cost providers. It's just not who we are.
Right.
Edna Monroe, I bought my plan through STIR in 2012, and I didn't really take the time to read it over before the meeting tonight, but I think it seemed to be somewhat exactly what you're talking about. I will go over my plan again now.
And you see my phone number, my email on the screen there. You are welcome to reach out to me and have me pull that file and look at it and give you a call and just kind of update anything and make sure you've got everything in order.
Okay, that's fine.
Ginger, we have a question about if there are laws about where ashes can be scattered in South Carolina.
Good question. So a lot of times I cover that so here's what I say: don't ask, don't tell. And I make a joke about that, but the reality is more states and more counties are coming up with laws or restrictions as it relates to scattering. South Carolina is still behind the curve a little bit on that. But here's the rule of thumb. If you scatter on someone's private property, you should seek permission to do that. Or I laugh and say that don't ask, don't tell, but you should seek permission because there's been lawsuits. When you go out and scatter someone's cremated remains, people could, it's a cemetery essentially. And in California, I'll give you a story. There was a company that would fly people out and scatter their ashes out over a certain area. Well, the landowners sued that company. Now, if you scatter in the water, a lot of people scatter in the water. Technically, you're supposed to go 3 miles out. You're supposed to record the longitude and latitude with the EPA. So if you see any business entities that offer that, they're abiding by those rules. Private individuals go out on boats all the time and scatter. One other thing I'll say to be cautious about, if you do scatter, Those cremated remains are in a bag that is not easy to get into, so you have to be prepared to get into it. And there's a disc, a unique disc with a number that is associated with you and the funeral home name. So people have dumped the whole thing into the water and it's washed up on shore. And then they say, oh, J. Henry Sturr Funeral Home. They call us, we go to our log and we can tell them exactly who that person is. So you just need to be very cautious about what you're doing. And we have a lot of families, we have individual vials. They want to split someone up and maybe they're going to bury a portion or they're going to scatter portions in different areas. One other thing while on that topic, if you fly with cremated remains, we'll make sure you've got all the documentation you need and make sure you've got an urn that can go through the x-ray machine, because people do fly with urns to different places.
What about making jewelry out some of the ashes?
Listen, we do that all the time. That's something else I never dreamed when they came out with jewelry that
Yeah.
people would do that. But they do. I mean, people make diamond rings.
Yes.
You can have lockets that are where a little bit of the cremated remains go in. We fingerprint everybody now because we have jewelry that is a thumbprint. So people really like those, and we make those available to families. We even have the little keepsake urns where, you know, all the kids want a little bit. So, and like I said, when those first came out, 20 so years ago, I thought, well, that's kind of odd, but people are doing that all the time.
Yeah, I have family in Las Vegas and California that does that.
Mm-hmm. Everything started as it relates to cremation in California and came this way.
Yeah.
So I have a question. This is Marty Adams, and I won't turn on my video. If you do a whole funeral and then cremate, then you've got the price of embalming, right?
You do, correct.
And what if, our children do not live near us? And, I'm going to have this conversation with them, that if, for instance, I'd ask my stepchildren if their father should die, do they want to see him before he's cremated? Now, if they just want to be able to see the body, if they can get there quickly, we wouldn't have to embalm, would we?
Correct. So what we do at Stir, we offer every family this opportunity for the reason there may need to be closure and they want to see their loved one. So
Right.
we do all that downtown on Calhoun Street. On Calhoun Street, we have our care center where we prepare people for traditional funerals as well as cremation. If someone has a need and the cause and manner of death, could change that, whether we would not have to embalm, we would not have to prepare them. We do some basic bathing, just some basic preparations so they look presentable. Mm-hmm. We use one of our visitation rooms downtown. It's not for the public, it's just for immediate family members. And I'll describe it, it's like a bed type setting with a quilt where it's a good memory picture, and we allow people to come in and do that. And we do that quite often.
Okay, thank you. And then how soon would you have to do that?
Well, we have climate control, a lot of climate control storage.
Okay.
And so, we could wait several days.
Okay.
And, those are one-on-one discussions at the time. I like to make that disclosure because we never know what the cause and manner of death is going to be.
Right, exactly. I understand that. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Shelby, do you deal with Ramsey Creek or Green Burial at all in South Carolina?
I do. Ramsey Creek's from my part of the world, as you know. Yes, we do a lot with green burials now. We have everything we need merchandise-wise. We even have, I'll call it an embalming fluid. It's a preservative that's not formaldehyde-based that we can utilize too, providing the cemetery allows it. There's Ramsey Creek Preserve. There's two of them around Columbia now too.
Thank you.
All biodegradable caskets. We have those available too. I like to say this because we serve the Jewish community here in Charleston, and they function by green burials when you think about it. All biodegradable casket, no embalming, and
Oh, interesting.
mhm.
I have a question that relates to implants. If you have had hip replacements or knee replacements or any of those things, what do they do with that when they embalm someone?
Well, when we embalm somebody, it stays with them. When we cremate them, that's a different story.
Excuse me, I meant cremate. Yeah,
Yeah.
I meant cremate.
So
Yeah.
when you sign your pre-need cremation authorization, we've just added something about that because titanium hip joints survive that process.
Mhm.
And what we do with the family signs off on this, we donate that titanium hip joint to a recycle place. We do not profit or take money. We donate the money to a charity. So we ask those questions either when you sign your pre-need authorization, then we verify that with the family. Like if you have a pacemaker, for example, that's dangerous to put in the crematory. We remove those pacemakers.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll ask you that at the time. That's about the only thing that survives though are those titanium replacement parts.
Another question, Ginger.
Mhm.
How long does the typical cremation process take?
You're talking about the cremation itself?
Mm-hmm.
Approximately 2 hours, give or take, depending on, trying not to be too blunt here, but depending on how many cremations we've done, how hot it already is, just like an oven, about 2 hours. And then you've got to, of course, let everything cool down before you can open up the crematory and process the cremated remains.
Okay, thank you.
And do you have green urns that would, for instance, at St. Stephen's, we have a memorial garden.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a biodegradable urn?
Absolutely. We have biodegradable urns.
Ginger, I had a question. South Carolina, there's a lot of old families and a lot of old cemeteries. What are the limitations on where someone can be buried?
You can be buried on your own property. I get asked that a lot. So
Really?
yes.
So I can be buried in my backyard.
You can be buried in your backyard. And I can tell you in my career, we've moved a lot of people out of their backyard when they get ready to sell the property.
I bet so.
You know, we had the funeral home in Pickens. I can remember somebody had dug a grave with a backhoe and it was really deep. And then they got ready to sell the property. And of course, the family didn't want a grave right out their back door. So we moved them.
Jeez.
If
Well,
you have a big,
Ginger,
Mhm.
Ginger, thank you so much for your presentation and for your time with us this evening. Does anyone have any further questions before we move on to funeral planning?
One more question I'd like to ask
Go ahead, Edna.
about the jury. If my kids want some of my ashes, do I have to come in and re-sign some of the paperwork for them to get some of the ashes?
So let me pull it and look at it and I'll let you know.
Okay, I'll call you.
Write down that cell number. That's the best
I
way to get
have.
directly to me and just call me and let me pull the file and let's go through all that.
Thank you. I have, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Ginger, you are welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the conversation, or if you need to log off, whatever is easiest. But please, we are so thankful for your time, and I know folks will be in touch with you, and I'll be in touch with you regarding these slides, as I know some folks would like to get this information that were on the slide. So thank you so much for your
Absolutely. I'm
Thank you
glad to
very
be
much.
here.
Yes.
Thank y'all. Enjoy being with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are going to now continue our conversation as we think about the funeral service that you can also plan beforehand. And some of you, I hope, received the directive that Amanda Rucker sent out today. And this is the burial of the dead. And this is a directive for a funeral or memorial service. And this, you know, while many of you may want to turn this in at St. Stephen's, this could be for any house of worship. I mean, this information would be helpful to any clergy person, or even if you would like to have a service at the funeral home, the selection of readings or music would be helpful there as well. So I am going to share, I'm going to try to share my screen. Is that coming up?
No. Nope.
Okay. Do you all, this is me continuing to find this out, but I hope that you all have this and can look at this on your own. But the first primary things that you could write or that you can fill out on this would be personal information, and then the type of service that you would like. And oftentimes this is your children or loved ones may know that you would like to have a communion at your service, but maybe they don't. So would you like to have Holy Communion at your service? Would you like to have Rite 1 or Rite 2 language used? And then also, are you choosing to be at a chapel or funeral chapel or in a specific church or place of worship? Any sort of details about who you would like to participate in your funeral as either an usher or a reader, that is always helpful. And then in the document that I sent to all of you, it includes suggested hymns and readings. And so, are there particular hymns that you have loved over the years? Are there particular readings that are important to you? But one thing that I want to read is from the very bottom of the first page, and I'll just read this to you. The liturgy for the funeral, for the burial of the dead, is an Easter liturgy, and it finds all meaning in the resurrection, because Jesus was raised from the dead, and we too shall be raised. The liturgy, therefore, that we use at St. Stephen's and in the Book of Common Prayer is characterized by joy in the certainty that, quote, neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ our Lord. This joy, however, does not make human grief unchristian. The very love we have for each other in Christ brings deep sorrow when we are parted by death. Jesus himself wept at the grave of his friend. So while we rejoice that one we love has entered into the nearer presence of our Lord, we sorrow in sympathy with those who mourn. And I love that line at the very end, because a funeral service is a time for us to gather together and to sorrow in sympathy with one another. And yet the liturgy of the Book of Common Prayer is always focusing us toward the understanding that nothing separates us from our loved one in God and Jesus Christ our Lord. And so again, part of thinking about a funeral and preparation is again giving assistance to your family and friends about what you think is important or what you would like to have at your service, and it relieves them from having to make these decisions in a time that is very emotional. One thing I will also mention in the Episcopal Church is that normally the priest does give a sermon or homily. We don't normally have eulogies in the service. And again, that is primarily a time in which the clergy person is able to talk about the individual, but again, to point to the resurrection. And so normally, if someone would like to speak, we often ask that happen at a reception after the service, and to offer those kinds of comments. So again, I'm sorry I can't share my screen, but this document was emailed to each of you, and this is something that you can keep on file. If you fill it out, you can keep on file here at St. Stephen's or wherever you worship. Most folks will, be happy to keep these documents for you. Does anyone have any questions about this?
I'll ask a question. Courtney, do you have to have a certain number of hymns and a certain number of readings? Or can you have more hymns or fewer hymns or?
So normally, Marty, it is similar to a Sunday morning service with a scripture from the Hebrew reading, Old Testament, Psalm, New Testament, and Gospel.
Okay.
And then there are periods if there's something else that if you'd only like to do one reading and the Psalm and a Gospel, but always a Gospel reading, especially if there's communion.
Okay.
And some people want one or two hymns. Some people want more, but again, that is really up to the individual. Depending on one's family, what's often interesting is some folks might say, I want 4 hymns, but if the family that's coming may not regularly attend an Episcopal church, for example, that music may be different if your family is also from another tradition. I will say for my own parents' funeral, at the Episcopal church, we had a lot of Baptists who were there, and we had a lot of music that was, they just weren't used to quite that much, but it was exactly what we wanted and needed. So again, it's just up to your family.
Mm-hmm.
Courtney, can you talk at all about the memorial garden and what are the requirements or restrictions or the process?
I have to say, I am embarrassed to say that I do not know all of those, and I am going to have to get those details and email them to you because there's a document, and I will send those out tomorrow. But again, that is a crematorium. So in the garden, it is places for ashes. And people can have their names inscribed there, and I will send all those details to you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oops.
Courtney, this is Ted. Hey, thank you and Jim for doing this. I'm sorry I didn't make last week's. But this is more of just a question, not that I'm planning on having people, talk about me at my funeral, but I have been to Episcopal services where friends or family members have come up front before the priest gave a homily or gave a sermon to give remembrances. So is that just sort of a priest by priest thing that you work out with the priest, or is it because I know I've been to Episcopal services where that's happened.
So really, it's really kind of a priest by priest conversation. And I will say part of the challenge, Ted, is it goes again towards certain family dynamics. When you have maybe multiple situations going on, and also to the length of the service. So it's having those conversations about who wants to speak, what's the nature of what is wanting to be said, are there other people who will then want to be a part of that? And so really it's with each clergy person to have those types of conversations ahead of time, because it can, and we've probably all been to different funerals in a variety of traditions where it can become very, very lengthy. And while funerals are always emotional, we're also wanting to hold this sacred space and continue to move the liturgy forward. Any other questions?
Yes. Can you address what the standard or regular gratuity is in a service that we should leave for our family to provide?
So I will also send this out. There generally are fees for the musician, as well as to be buried in the garden. There's also a suggested donation to the officiating clergy. And so I will include that all in the document that I send out to you as well.
And then also, were I to die tomorrow, is it possible for the priest from my previous parish, who knows me quite well, to preside instead of the priest from my current parish?
So again, that goes to each kind of conversation with the priest. And normally, for example, if you're attending, let's say St. Stephen's, that clergy person would, Adam would be in touch with that person. And there would be a conversation about that. It's not to say that it can't happen. It's also to say, depending on that person's schedule, if they're able to do that, travel wise, but that's always a conversation. Yes. I mean, that does not have to, that it's always able to be a dialogue.
The conversation is probably enough. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding, and again, I apologize that I did not have the funeral costs in front of us, but I will get those to you tomorrow. We have about 9 minutes left, and I just want to kind of take my priest hat off for a moment and just as a daughter, when I lost both my parents in the same year, 10 months apart, and was the executor of both of their estates. And I spend a lot of time, or I have spent a lot of time thinking about end of life issues and how I wish we had done things in other ways. And I just want to leave with a couple of thoughts before we close tonight, and also I'll open up for any other questions. But I did not want to have these conversations with my parents. I did not want to talk about end of life. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you for all being here and being a part of this conversation. My mother would ask me every year to sit down with her and look at where important documents were. And I literally would say, Mom, I just got home for Thanksgiving. I don't want to do this right now. And I wish that I had. And so for some of you, there may be loved ones who you're ready to have these conversations with, and they're not ready. And I'm going to be sending along a book title that I found very helpful called The Other Conversation, which is really delving into why it's important for us to have these conversations with our loved ones. So thank you for being here. And the other couple of things I will say is, again, please don't lock important documents in lock boxes. Make sure your family knows where those things are. In your will, if there are any particular designations you want to make about items or money, about where they should go to certain organizations or people, please make that as clear as possible. Obituaries, I will say it was so hard finding all the little information about the high schools my parents had graduated from and the colleges and military service. if all of those details, again, there's a spot in here for obituaries, those types of details. Look on page 14. I had a note to myself. I mean, these are just really wonderful gifts to kind of leave, like whom to notify. I mean, someone's going to have to call all of these folks. And so to know who prepares your taxes or to let your hairdresser know, I know that seems weird, and yet people care about their clients and want to know who, you know, what happens to folks. Also social media, and this is something to be thinking, you know, when someone passes, to kind of give yourself space to not post it right away, to really allow family to give time to call one another, because it's hard to learn that news on social media. We've had a couple of instances where people have posted very quickly. There's also a survivor's to-do list on page 29. I mean, this is going to be, you know, what your loved ones are thinking of doing. But again, this is just really helpful, even for you to just read, but know like how you might help make it easier for your loved one as they have to consider these things. And the last thing I will say is, as we come closer to Thanksgiving and Christmas and the holidays, you know, none of us know how much time we have, but many of us have these little now video recorders. And if there are videos that you all could take with one another or stories you want to share, you can even just do audio recordings. But I will say those are some of the greatest gifts, just how easily now we can have messages and videos that we can enjoy for years and years to come.
So
Any-
I have one more question. You
Yes.
mentioned this book, The Other Talk. Are there other books that you would recommend?
I'm embarrassed to say that I have a lot, but I will put together a reading list.
Good. Yeah. That would be helpful to have a bibliography.
Sure. And again, this is my limited part-time but work, and yet this is all something that is deeply personal to me, and I'll be happy to share all this information. So just know that you'll be getting some more from Jim and I, as far as the slides from tonight, the bibliography of books and references. But most of all, we just want you all to know that there are folks within this congregation, that this is not a one-time conversation. Right. You know, this is something that all of us are thinking about, or, you know, might be thinking about in different ways. And if you ever have questions or concerns or just thoughts, you know, please feel free to talk with us about it.
Please.
Courtney, hi, Jim, this is Holly speaking. I just wanted on the books that I found really, really good, but it's more medically oriented, but it's dealing with end of life medical care and how to deal with that, and palliative care, and it's called On Being Mortal, and it's written by a physician, and sadly I've forgotten what his name is.
It's a Gawande.
I'm just gonna make one comment.
Go ahead, Holly.
He's United States, but his family was born in India, and his father was a physician also in India, but lived in California, I think. But it really goes into a lot of points about you know, assisted living versus nursing home versus the needs of older people, and then somebody in the process of actually dying in palliative care. And I think it made it just really crystal clear for me. And I want to give a copy of that book to both my daughters. You know, it just it's just really, really, I found it very helpful. So I would highly encourage that.
that will be on the list of books. Thank you so much for highlighting it. Robert?
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Ginger. I will be giving you a call at STIRS. Also, I have posted some legal references in the chat box, and I'll close by saying, please write your own obituaries. You want them to be as fluffy as possible to your, because once you go to the clouds, you can't revise them. Thank you.
That's right. That's it. That's it. That's right. Last word.
I will say there is something about reading really wonderful obituaries.
Yes,
And
yes.
because all of our lives are, oh, excuse me, so full and rich. And to really, you know, just share with us what you would like us to know about the life that you've lived. They're really just gems to read. And I will say, we did the All Souls service, you know, this a few weeks ago here at St. Stephen's. And so we literally went back and just read all of those obituaries. And it was just such a gift to be able to read about the lives of all the saints that we so know and love. So anyway, it's at 7:30. Ginger, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Jim, thank you for all you've done. And again, we're here, we're part of the conversation, and what a gift you all are giving your loved ones by being here and doing this work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.